Hello everyone, welcome to this Node.js tutorial. So my name is Nikhil, and in this tutorial you will learn about the Node.js, the Express.js and the MongoDB and how to integrate all together. So in this tutorial, first you will learn about how to create the applications with the Node.js, and then you will learn about the features of the Node.js like the file system, like how to work with the file systems and how to create your own modules inside the Node.js as well. And after that you will learn about the API servers in the Node.js as well. And after all of the things, we will create a major project with that. So we'll create the major project with the Node.js, Express.js and the MongoDB. So we'll work with the file system and we will create an API with the Node.js and the Express.js. And then the API will contain a CRUD operation with the user management. So we will just add the user, we will delete the user, we will update the user, and then we will get all of the users, and then we will get a specific user from their ID. So that will be a major project. So let's start. So please like the video and please subscribe to the channel as well, so I would be motivated to post the videos like this. So let's start the tutorial. About the Node.js. So the Node.js is a JavaScript engine which was originally built for the browser and now can work without a browser and having some extra APIs with it. So it was a JavaScript engine like the Chrome's V8 engine, which was taken out of the Chrome, and now it is being maintained as a standalone project. So it is just a JavaScript runtime environment in which we can create the JavaScript, in which we can run the JavaScript code outside of the browser as well, and it allows us to run the JavaScript outside of the browser. So it is just an open source and the cross-platform JavaScript runtime environment, and it is very popular tool for creating any kind of application that you want. You can create a simple applications, you can create the server applications, you can create API applications with that. So it runs on the Chrome's V8 engine, which is the core function of the Google Chrome, and now it is working outside of the browser as well. And this allows the Node.js to be very performant as well, and now the Node.js gives very good performance. And now we will see about the MongoDB. So now we will see about the Express.js. So what is the Express? So the Express is just a Node.js application framework for building the REST APIs. So it is just a Node.js web application framework that provides broad features for building the web and the mobile applications, and it is used to build single page, multi-page and hybrid web applications with the features of the Express.js. Like we have the features of the routing, we have the features of creating the REST APIs. So the Express.js is just a framework for the Node.js. Now we will see about the MongoDB. So what is the MongoDB? So the MongoDB is a NoSQL database which stores documents in the form of collections instead of the records and tables as in the SQL database. If you are coming from the SQL, so it stores the documents inside the collections instead of the records inside the table. So the document is just a JSON document or a BSON document, but the collection is a collection of the document. So it contains so many documents inside that as per the tables in the SQL. So table contains so many records. So this is a NoSQL database, and then we don't need to install any MongoDB in our system as well. So we will work with the cloud version of the MongoDB. So now we will see the workflow of our applications. So first we will learn that how to create the Node.js applications, and then we will just create the package repositories for the Node.js as well. And then we will work with the file system. So you will master the file system inside the Node.js as well, in which we will write to the files, we will create the files, and then we will read the data from the files as well. And then we will work with the module system inside the Node.js and how to create our own modules inside the Node.js. So we will learn about the modules, then we will just create our own modules as well. And then you will learn about the API servers and how to create the API servers inside the Node.js. So you will master about that. And then after all of the things, we will create a major project with the user management tool, which is a tool of creating, adding, deleting and updating and getting the specific user from the database. So this is the workflow of this tutorial, and then we have the parts of the application as well. So first we will create the API routes, we will create the API server inside the Node.js. So it will be created with the Node.js, Express.js, MongoDB and the MVC pattern. So we will follow the MVC pattern like the model of the user, we got the controllers of the users, we got the routes of the users, and then we will just create the API calls from the front end. And the front end, we are not creating any specific front end application, so we are calling that API with the Postman. So the Postman is a free tool in which we can use to test our API inside the backend. The Postman will send the request to the backend, and the backend will just give some response to the Postman. So these are the parts of this application. Let's start building that project. So please like the video and please subscribe to the channel as well, so I could be motivated to post the videos like this. So let's start building the Node.js application. So now we are into the VS Code, and now we need to just install the Node.js first. So we need to move on to the Chrome, and then we can just search for the Node.js, and then you will see there will be the very first link of the Node.js, and then you can just install the Node.js from this site. So you can just click on the Node.js, and then you can see there are two versions if you're on the Windows. The one is the 16.16.0, The second one is a 18.7.0. So the 16.16.0 is a LTS version which has the long-term support schedule from the Node.js. But if you want to install current latest features, then you can move on with the 18.7.0. But I would recommend you can choose the 16.16 because it's recommended for most of the users. And if you are new to the Node.js, then it would be very specific for you. And then you can just download for your Windows. And if you are on the Mac or any Linux, so you can just click on the downloads, and then you will see there will be the download files according to your OS, like the source code and the binaries and the Linux binaries, the Mac. So you can just select any OS and then you can just download according to your OS. So the steps are very simple. You just need to click next, 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 and then after that you have to edit to the path as well. So after you have installed the Node.js, and now you can say this is a Visual Studio Code. So if you don't have the VS Code, so you can just move on to the Chrome again, and then you can also install the Visual Studio Code as well. So you can just search for the VS Code, and then you will see there will be a very first link of the Visual Studio Code from the Microsoft. So you can just download and you can just install the VS Code as well. So you can just download according to your OS. There will be some options for different OS as well. So you can just click on the download, and there will be, like, you can see we have the Linux, we have the Mac, we have the Windows. So you can just select any file and then you can install the Visual Studio Code. And now let's move on to the application. So now we are into the Visual Studio Code, and now we are into the Node.js basics. So I've created a folder as the Node.js basics. So we are into that directory, and now inside that, now we will just create a basic Node.js application. So for that, we need to just create a new file, and it can be the app.js. And now here we can run any JavaScript code with that. So we can run a console.log as well, and then we can just write the hello. So if we now save, so now we need to run this file. So now this JavaScript file will be then run inside the Node environment and not onto the browser. So we don't need to run onto the browser by creating a separate HTML file and then linking that file to the app.js. So we need to run it inside the Node environment. So what is the Node environment? So as you have installed the Node.js, you can just search for the Node inside your Windows, and then you can see, you will see there's a Node.js. So this is a Node environment where all of your JavaScript code runs. And then this is a terminal of the Node.js, which is known as REPL. So you can just write anything with that, like 1 plus 1, it will give you 2. You can just write 10 minus 5, it will give you all the values, and then you can write the hello, and then you can see hello is not defined. You can define the hello as well, like hello will be equals to the string as the hello, and then we have the undefined. And if you will just console.log hello as well, then it will give you the value of the hello as well. So you have the hello. So then you will see now you have the hello with that. So this is the Node environment. So all of the Node.js code runs inside this Node REPL environment. So for that, now we need to run this app.js as well inside this REPL environment. So for that, what we need to do is now we need to just run the node. It can be the app.js, and then this file will be then moved on to the Node REPL, and then you will see we have the hello inside the terminal as well. So now it is perfectly running. Now we can just write any JavaScript function with that as well. So we can have here the function, it can be the get name for anything like get name, and then we can just provide the name as well. And after that we can just log the value of the name as well. So we can have here the log, and inside the log we can have the my name is, and then we can write here the name. In the second parameter, it can be the name, and after that we can call this function as well as the get name. We can provide the value as the Nikhil. If we now save, if we now just again restart the application by the node app.js, and then you can see my name is Nikhil. So now you can run any JavaScript code with that. So now you have created the basic application with the Node.js, and now it's time to learn some important features of the Node.js. So the first feature will be the modules. So what are the modules? So modules in the Node.js is just a simple or complex functionality of a code which is organized in a single or multiple JavaScript file. So modules are just JavaScript files which have the reusable code. So we have a reusable code, like we create an object, and that object can be a reusable code, and then we can use that reusable code in any of the Node.js file. So they are just the functions which we can use inside the different files. So they are just the functions, and then you know about the packages inside the Node.js, like for the npm. So we install some packages, like we install the express.js, we install some libraries. So they are just the modules inside the Node.js which have the predefined code. So we use that predefined code inside the application. So they are very reusable libraries. So the module is just a reusable code which was exported from a JavaScript file or the Node.js JavaScript file. So now let's create a module. So in the Node.js, we have three different type of modules. We have the core modules, and the core modules are the modules which are already available inside the Node.js. So those core modules which are available are the HTTP, We have the HTTP module, we have the URL module, we have the query string module, which includes some methods to deal with the queries, and then we have the path module, which provides you some paths according to the files, and then it gives you the FS module for the file system modules, and it includes some classes, methods, and some events to work with the files input output. And then we have the utils module, which have some utility functions which are used for the programmers. So now if you want to use any of the modules, so you can just use any of them. So I will show you an example that how to use the file system module, and then we will use the path module with that as well. So now we will see that how to use that module. So now let's work with the file system module. So first we need to import the FS module. So we need to import const fs equals to the require. If we need to import anything from the Node.js, so we can use the require to import anything, and then we need to provide the package inside the string, and it can be the we need the file system module, so we can have the fs. So then the fs module will be then imported, and now you can just hover over the fs as well. Then you can see it will give you the module as the fs, and after that the fs has some functions. You can have the dir function, we have the stat, we have the write, we can have the access to access any file, we have the access in the synchronous way, we have the append file syncs, and then you can see all of those functions are available. So these are the modules as well. So they are just the reusable code which are just exported in a function, so we can just use these functions. And now we will see that how to create a file with the fs. So we can dynamically create a file with the Node.js application. So for that, what we need to do is first we need to get the path where we need to store the file, and then we need to add the content of the file. So how can we do that? So first we need to generate the path, and now to generate the path, so as we have discussed earlier that we have the path module as well as the core module inside the Node.js. So we can have the const path will be again equals to the require, so we can use the require, and then we need to provide the id as the path, so we can use the path which is already available. After that we need to create the path, so we can have our const file path where we need to generate the file, and it will be equals to the path. So we have the path, and then we have a function of join, so we need to join those paths. So now we need to just create the paths with that. And now what we need to do is now we need to access the current working directory. So we have the current working directory of the Node.js basics, but we know that, but the Node.js and the computer doesn't know. So for that, now what we need to do is now we need to access the global variable as the process. It is a process, but what is a process? So each Node.js script or a file runs inside a process, and it includes a process object to get all of the information about the current process, about the current execution, and all of the things about that Node.js application. So that all provides by the process, and then you can just access any function like that. You can abort that process as well. You can have all of the functions, and then you have the cwd function. So the cwd gives you the current working directory. So it means that the current working directory, so it will give you the current working directory with the path. So we need the current working directory with the path.join, and after that what we need to do is now we need to just define the file name with that. So we can have the file.txt. So we have this path, so we have the current working directory like Node.js basics, and inside that we will give the reference of the file.txt. And now we need to just create this file as well. So how can we do that? So with the file system, so now we need to work with the file system, so we need to use the file system fs, and then we have the function of the write file sync. So we can use this function, so it will just writes a file in the synchronous way, and then after that the first parameter that we need to provide is here the file. So we can have here the path or the file descriptor. As we have just got the path from there, so we can just directly put the path here. So we can have here the file path, and then the second parameter is the string that we want to add. So we can have here the string inside the array or the buffer or any object as well. So we can just provide the string, and it can be the my first file. So now if you will just run the Node.js application, so now what have we done here? So we have just provided the fs.write file sync, and then we have just provided the file path. So we have the my first file. You will just run the Node.js application node app.js, and then you can see after that you will see there will be the file.txt, and inside that you have the my first file. So this is how the file system works inside the Node.js. After that, if you want to read that file as well, so how can you do that? So again we have the function with the fs, so we have the fs.read file sync. So it will just read the file in the synchronous way. So again we need to provide the path, so we can just provide the same path, and then we need to read this file. And after that the second parameter is some options which we want to store. We have the encoding, we have the flags, so they are just not of use as of now. After that it gives you the file inside the buffer. It gives you inside the buffer, and after that what you can do is now you can just convert this into the string as well. So you can have the toString method to convert it inside the string. and after that you can just store inside a variable as well. So you can have the file content will be equals to this function, and after that you can just log as well. So you can have the log, and inside that you can log the file content. If you will just now save, if you will just now move on to the application, run the node app.js again, and then you can see you got the my first file as well. So this is how you can just read and write from the file system inside the Node.js. So now we have just covered the core functionality of the Node.js. So now we will see that how to create our own modules as well. So now we have covered the core, and now the second one is the local modules that we can use. So the local modules means that how we can create our own modules. So how can we do that? So either we can just create a new file, and it can be my module.js. So it can be module.js, and inside that what we can do is now we can just export anything from that module. So to export something from a module, you can use here the module dot exports dot anything, like you can have a file name or you can have a variable. So you can just have here the exports will be equals to again a string. So you can just export a string with that as well, like my exported module. So now you have just exported as a module.exports, and it is just a string. So now what can you do? So now you can just import that module.js file as well. So you can have there the const. It can be module, or it can be my module will be equals to, you need to add the require. So now you need to require this file, and it will be the module.js. If you will just now save, and now you will see if you will just log the my module here. So so you can just comment that out, and after that you can just log my module, and then you will see if you will run this application. Now I think we need to provide the path as well. So it is in the same directory, so we can have the same directory and slash module.js, and now you can see now we have the auto import as well. So we can just select this, and now you can see if we will just run this application again as the node app.js, and then you can see we have the my exported module. Now this file is also a module, and then you can just export anything from this module as well. So now we will just create a module that will just read and write the data from the file. So how can we do that? So we will use the same file system. So we can just access the const file path and these functions again. So we can just have here the const file path. We can remove from there, and then we can just add here. So we can just remove that thing from there, and after that we have the const file path equals to the path.join process.current working directory, and then we have the file.txt. Now we can just generate this inside a function as well. So we have we can have a function as the function. It can be the get file path, and the get file path, what we need to do is now we need to return this. We need to return this inside that. So we can have the return this code from that. So we don't need the file path as of now. And now this is also a module function as well. Now what we need to do is now we will just create a functions to write to the file and to get to the file as well. So how can we do that? So we can just create another function. So it can be the function, it can be the write to file. So this is a separate function and not from the fs module, but we will just use the fs module inside this function. So we can have this function, we can have the fs.write file sync. So we can just have this inside that. So we have the write to file, and inside that we will just expect the parameter as the file path. So we will just provide the file path, and after that we will just provide this string as well. So we will accept a string as well. So we have the string, and after that we need to just add here this string. So we can have here this string with that. After that what we need to do, so we can just read from the file as well. So again we can have a function, it can be the read from file, and then we need to provide the file path. So we can have here the file path, and after that we can just provide the function. So it can be the fs dot read file sync. So we can use the same content here. So we have the fs dot read file sync. So we can have this same function here, we can have this, and then we need to just return this. So we can have return this. So now we need to just import the fs module here as well. So we need to import that. So we can have the fs and the module both. So we can just copy both, and then we can just paste here both the modules. After that what we need to do is now we need to export these module functions as well, and after that we need to just export this function as well. So how can we do that? So we can just have here the exports dot the function name, like it can be the get file path. So we can have this function, and it will be equals to the get file path. So we need to point to this function. So we have the exports dot get file path equals to the get file path, and after that we need to do same for the write to file as well. So with exports dot write to file, and it will be equals to the write to file again. So we have the write to file, And after that we can do the same for the read from file. So we have the exports dot read from file will be equals to the read from file. So now we have exported all of these functions and they are also the module. And now what can we do is, now we are now already importing the module as well, so we can just destructure the functions as well. Like we can have the write to file, we can have the get file path. But now what we will do is, now we will just have the default export of the my module. So we can have the my module, and after that what can we do is, now we can just run the functions. Like we can have the log, so we can just get the my module dot, we can access the function of the read from file. So we need to provide the file path. So again we can provide the file path as the module dot get file path, and have the my module dot get file path. So if we just now save, if we just now move on to the terminal, if we just now run the node app.js, and then you can see now the my first file is working perfectly fine. And then you can just change the content as well, like you can add exclamation marks, and then you can also run this again, like you can have the node app.js, and then you can see we have the my first file as well. Everything is working perfectly fine. And after that we can just use the my module dot, it can be the write to file, so we can just write anything. Like now we need to get the path, so we need to provide the path as well, have the same path from there, we can have same path. And after that we need to provide the data as well in the second parameter. So we have this string like updated from app.js. If we just now save, if we just now again rerun the application, and then you can see now we have the updated app.js, and then we are logging the data from the file. So this is how we can just create our own custom modules as well inside the Node.js. So now we have learned about the core modules, about the local modules, and then we have learned about the export modules as well. So everything is working perfectly fine. So now we will see that how to create a web server with the Node.js. So now we can just move on to the app.js, and then we can just remove everything from there. And now we can just remove everything. So now we will see that how we can just create a web server or the HTTP server with the Node.js. So for that what we need to do is, now you just need to import the Express. So you need to install the Express, and you can also create the HTTP server with the HTTP as well. So we have the core module of the Node.js as the HTTP. So you can just have the require as the HTTP. So you can just import that from the HTTP. So then you will see the HTTP is already available. You can hover over that, but HTTP is the old approach as of now. But now we can just use the Express.js to create this web server with the API. So how can we do that? So we can just use here the Express. So for that we need to install the Express. And now to install the Express, we have the Node package manager, which is the npm, which will be by default installed when you will install the Node.js. So you can use that. So you can just have here the npm install. So for installing any package or anything, you can use the npm, which is the Node package manager, and then it targets to the Node repository as the package repository of the Node.js, npmjs.com. And then it will just install a package name of the unique name. So we can have here the Express. So now it will install the Express in your application as well. Express.js is a web application framework for the Node.js, and it provides you some various features that makes the web applications with the Node.js very fast and very easy. And it is based on the middleware systems on the Node.js, and we can use the middlewares from the Node.js to create some API routes with the Node.js. And now we will see that how to create the server with the Node.js. So first we need to import the node, we need to import the Express. So we can have Express will be equals to again the require. So we can have the require of the Express. So now we need to require the Express. And now what we can do is, now we can just define a variable to give the reference of this Express. So we can have the const app will be equals to the Express. So now the app variable holds the reference of this Express that we have installed. And now the application is the Express application. This now what we need to do is, now we need to just create a server. So how can we create that? So we need to use the app.listen. So we can just create a server, and then we need to provide the port. So now the server will listen to the port of the 5000, or you can just define any port, like you can define 8080, you can just define 300 as well, but we can define the 500 as well. So it will just work on the 5000, and after that we can provide the callback as well if the server is working. So we can have the console.log, and then we can just run anything like connected to localhost port of the 5000. If we just now save, if we will just run the application once again with the node app.js, and then you can see now it is connected to the localhost port of the 5000. So this is how we can just create a server. But as of now this is the empty server, so we don't have anything inside that. So now if you want to create an API with the Node.js, then how can we do that? So we can just create an API server as of now with the Express. So as we have discussed earlier that the Express runs on the middleware systems. So what we need to do is now we need to create a middleware for a API route. So we can use the app.use. So the use is used to create a middleware, and then in the first parameter we need to define the URL. So we can just define the same URL, like if we have the localhost port of the 5000, then the slash will give you the same route. And after that we need to provide the callback function. So the callback function in that the Express contains three objects. It is a request handler. So first it contains the request, which is the request, and the second it contains the response, is the response, and then this third it contains the next. So these are the callback parameters inside the node middleware, inside the Express.js. So the request is like the front end will request something from this API. So this will create a API. So front end will request something. So it gives you a request with the request object, and the response is what we need to send to the front end. So if the front end has requested something, so we need to provide the response to the front end as well. So the response is used to send some response to the front end, and the next is a function which is used to move on to the next middleware. So the next is used to move on to the next middleware. If we provide a next middleware, then the next, if you call here the next, then it will move on to the next middleware function. And now what we need to do, if we just move on to slash API slash 5000, so if we will just move on to the 5000 slash the same route, and after that if you want to just send something to the application, then what can we do is now we can just provide the response. So the response, then you can say we have some functions and methods with the response as well. So we can just use the send. So you can just send a response to the front end, and inside that you can just provide anything, like you can provide a string like hello world, or you can provide anything with that. So you will just provide the hello world. If you will just save, if you will just restart the application, and then you have the node app.js. And now if you will just open your browser, and then you can just run the localhost 5000, and then you will see it will give you the hello world. So now you can see, now this is the API, and this API is giving you the hello. If you are moving on to the slash route, and if you provide anything like slash user, then it will give you the user as well, like I'm Nikhil, so it will give you the Nikhil. If we will just restart the application, so now it will work on the localhost 5000 slash user. So now if you will just refresh the page, and then you can see it will give you the cannot get, because this route is not specified. But if you will just move on to the slash user, then you can see it will give you the Nikhil. So now you can see this is how the Node.js and the Express.js continuously works. So we need to provide the path, and then on this path only the request will be sent. So this is all about the Node.js and how to create the API. Now we have just completed some features of the Node.js, like the modules, local modules, core modules, the file system modules, and then we have created our own modules as well, and then we have learned about the process model as well, and then we have demonstrated the file systems, like how to create the files and how to read the data from files. And now the basic features of the Node.js are completed, and now we need to move on, and then we can just create an application with the Node.js, which will be a user management application. We will create a major project which will be a REST API with the Node.js. So we will just connect with the MongoDB, we will connect with the real database, and then we will create an application like the user management. And then don't worry, I will explain everything which I will write inside that application. So now let's start that application. So now let's start building that application. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a new folder, and the new folder name will be like the application name. So it can be user management. Is we want to initialize a new npm package as well. So again we need to move on to the cd into the home directory, and then cd into the user management, and then we need to just write the command as the npm init. So we have a trick inside the npm as well. So if you will just write the npm init -y, then it will just select all of the default options, and it will just create a package.json file into your directory. So if you will just write this, and then you will see now the package.json file will be then created, and now all of the settings are not default settings here. And if you will just move on to the package.json, now you can see we have the user management, and then we have the version of the 1.0.0. We have the main file as the index.js, and then we have the scripts of the test, then we have the author, we have the blank, and then we have the license as the ISC. So now we have initialized a new package.json file inside our application, and now we need some packages to install to work with this project. The first package is the Express, so we need to install the Express. So now we can write the npm install as the Express. And now the Express.js is now installed. And now before moving ahead, now we can just move on to the MongoDB to add a database for our application. So we can just move on to the mongodb.com, And then what we need to do is we need to just click on the sign in. And now here you will see there will be two options of the signing in. So then you will see first the Google and the second is the GitHub. So we can just directly log in with the Google as well. So if you want to directly log in with the GitHub, so you can just select that option. And now you can see this is the home screen of the MongoDB, and then you can just click on a drop down and then you can just select a new project from there. So you can just move on and then you can just click on the new project button. And after that you will see a screen of the create a project. So you can just create a new project and it can be a user management. So we have a user management and then you can just click on the next. And then you can see there will be a screen of the add members and the set permissions. So you can just skip that part and then you can just click on the create project. So it will just create a brand new MongoDB project for our application. Now you will see there will be an option of the database deployment. So now we need to just build a database and then we need to deploy a database onto the cloud. So we don't need to install anything inside the system locally because the MongoDB cloud database is like on the cloud version. So we can just directly access the database from the cloud as per in the SQL. So if we were using the SQL, so in the SQL we need to install the SQL in our system, but here with the MongoDB we have the cloud version and then we can just build a database and then we can just deploy the database on the cloud. And then you can just click on the build a database button and then you can see you can just select the serverless. If you want to move on with the serverless approach, you can just move on to the serverless, and the serverless is a paid version. And then we have a dedicated version as well, which is recommended for most of the user. So if we are building a production applications, then we need to move on with the dedicated. But if we want to just learn and then we want to explore about the MongoDB, so we can just create a free cluster as well, and then we can just click on the create button as well from there. And then you will see there will be a screen of create a shared cluster. So now we will create a shared cluster with anyone, and then we can just keep the default settings and then we can just click on the create cluster. It will just create a cluster for our application. And now you will see this screen will appear of the username and the password. So now we need to create a database user to read, write or access to the database. So then we can write the admin. So we have the database user at the admin and then we need to write the password. So we can just click on the auto generate secure password to just auto generate the secure password for us. And then you will see this is the password. So we can just copy that password as well. And then we can just store that password here. So now I will store that password here. And now what we can do is we can just click on the create user. So it will just create the user for our application as well. And now what we can do is now we can just move on directly to the network access. We can just move on to the network. And then we can just allow the IP address here in the application. And then you will see we have a button of the add IP address. We can just click on that button and then it will just give you the IP address entry. So you can just select any of the IP address that you want. So you can just add your current IP address if you want your database to only be accessed by your current IP address only. But if you want to allow the access from anywhere, you can just click from the anywhere. So it will give you the entry of the 0.0.0.0, and then you can just click on the confirm. And then now your database will be deployed within very few moments. So then you will see we are deploying your changes. Until that, what we can do is we can just move on to the application again, and then we can just install and then we can just modify our package.json file. So the modifications will be now we need to install some packages to connect with the MongoDB and to configure with the MongoDB as well. So the package name will be the Mongoose. So we have a Mongoose. So it would be the npm install. It would be the Mongoose. So we need to install this package. And here you can see the Mongoose is now installed as well. And now what we need to do is we want to just add here the start script at the node app.js, but here we will not use the node directly. So we have the separate package as the nodemon, which we will use here. So the nodemon is like a package which runs on any file change. So if we change any file inside our application, so it will just restart the server automatically. So we don't need to just stop and restart the server with the help of the nodemon. So we can install the nodemon as well. So we can have the npm install as the nodemon. And here you can see the nodemon is also installed. And now what we need to do is we want to add a start script inside our application. So it would be the start, and the start would be equals to the nodemon. So we have the nodemon as the app.js. So it will just listen to the file changes of the app.js, and then we have a main as well inside our application. So we have the main. So main will not be the index.js, it would be the app.js instead of the index. So now we have just completed the modifications of the package.json. And now what we need to do is we want to create a file as the app.js. So now we have the app.js, and now we can just log something to the console to test if the nodemon is working or not. So we can have the hello world. And now if I will now just save, and now we can just start the application with the npm start. So we can have a npm start to start the application. And then now you can see the node mount is working perfectly fine. Then you can see it is watching the extensions of the all of the JS files, JSON files, and the MGS files. And now you can see the hello world is being printed to the system console as well. And now once we will change any file after that, like I will add 2 exclamation marks after that. So once I will just save this file, and then you will see the application will be then compiled again, and then you can see you have the hello world as well. So this is how the node mount works. So it works on any of the file changes of the app.js reference. So now we can just move on to the MongoDB again, and then we can see if the database is deployed or not. I think the database is not deployed. So now we need to just connect to the database. So what we need to do first, we can just first import the express to create a server. So we can have a const express will be equals to the require. So we have the require, and it will be the express. Now the express is now required, and now we can just generate the app variable as well. So the app variable will hold all of the functionalities of this application. So we have the app equals to the express. So now we will give the reference of the express to this app variable. And now what we need to do is we want to just import the mongoose. So we can again have the import as the mongoose, const as the mongoose as we have just installed will be equals to again the require. Require will be equals to the mongoose. Now the mongoose is now required, and now the mongoose have a connect function inside that. So we have the mongoose namespace, and inside the mongoose we have the connect function. So we can have a mongoose dot connect. So we have a connect function with that, and with the connect, first parameter that we want to give is the URL. So we need to add the URL, and we can get the URL from the cloud. So there we need to add the cloud URL of the MongoDB database. So we have the option of the connect. So we can just click on the connect button, and then you can see there are 3 options. So now you can see if you want to connect with the shell, you can just move on with that. And if you want to install MongoDB locally, and if you want to connect with the Compass, you can just use that. But we want to connect with the MongoDB native drivers, so we can just connect our application. And then you can see after clicking on that, there will be the URL. So you can just select on any of the driver, like if you are using the Node.js, as we are using the Node.js. So if you are with the PHP, you can select the PHP or a Ruby or Java or any Scala. And then we are into the Node.js, so we will select with the Node.js. And now we have the URL. So we can just copy that URL from there. And then you can see we have a node as well. So we need to replace the password from that with the actual password that we have copied. So we have copied this password. So we need to add this password for the admin user. So then we can just copy that URL. And then inside the connect function, the first parameter is this. So we can just paste this URL here. Now the URL is now there. And now we need to just replace the password. So we can just remove the password, and then we can just paste this password from here. So we have this password now. So the mongoose.connect returns a promise. So we need to just add the then case statements as well. So we can have a then statement, and in the then statement, what we can do, so after we have successfully connected to the MongoDB database, then we can just open a server on any port. Then we can just have the app.listen. So we have the listen on the port of the 5000. So we can have a port again from the 5000, and then we can have the callback after that as well. So again we have the callback inside that, and the callback will just contain a console.log, and it will be the connected and listening on port 5000. Now this is the message of the connected. Now you can see we have the mongoose.connect, and then we have the app.listen port of the 5000, and then we have the console.log connected and listening to the localhost port of the 5000. Now you can see inside a console window we have the connected and the localhost listening to the 5000. So now the MongoDB connection is successful, and now you can see we have, and now the port is also available onto the localhost port of the 5000. So the port is 5000, and now we have the mongoose.connect, and the connect is like a MongoDB operation. It is a database operation, and it can fail as well. So what we need to do is we can just add the catch statement as well. So the catch, if we get an error, so we will just console.log the error as well, because if any time the MongoDB server is down, so we will get the error. So we will just catch the error, and then we will just log the error inside the console. So now everything is working perfectly fine, and the MongoDB connection is perfectly successful. And now we need to just move on to the application that we are building. So we are building an application with the user management, where we want to create some things related to the user. So we will follow the MVC approach, which is the model, view, and the controllers. So we will use that approach with this application. So here we need to create the model of the user. So the user model will contain the schema of the user. So about the model and the schema, so they are just connected. So we have the schema of the user inside the model. So we need to build the schema, and the schema is like a structure of how the all user will contain. So all users will have their name, will have their email, and will have their password with that. So we need to build that schema with the model. So now what we can do is, and then we can just create a folder as the model. So we have the model, and then we can create another folder as the controller. And now about the controller. So the controllers contain some functions which is used to control on any API call. So when we call an API, suppose we call an API with the API slash to get all of the users. So that route will contain that controller function, and that controller function will be then called directly. And now after the controller, what we want to do is we want to create another folder, the user management, and it will be equals to the routes. So now we have the folder of the controller, model, and the routes will contain all of the route structures of this server in which the API will be called. So now we have the model and the controllers, and the model and the controllers are into the backend application. View part will contain from the front end, like we can do in the React, or we can do in the Vue application, we can do in the JavaScript, or with the any front end library. So now we have just defined the model and the controller, and now we need to define the user model. So we can just create a file. It can be the user. So we have this model of the user, so we can have the user.js. And now what we need to do is first we need to build the schema. So we have the schema class inside the mongoose to create the schema. So what we can do, so we can just import the mongoose. So we can have a const mongoose will be equals to the require. So we have the require of the mongoose. Now the mongoose is now imported, and now what we can do is we want to just build the schema. So we can have a const user schema will be equals to a new mongoose.schema. So we have a mongoose.schema, or we can just define a new variable as the schema here. So we can have a const schema will be equals to the mongoose.schema. So we need to give the reference of this mongoose.schema to the schema variable. After that, what we can do, we can just have here the user schema will be equals to a new schema. So we have the new schema, and the new schema will contain the JSON fields inside that. It will contain the fields. So the first thing that the user will contain a name. So we need to define the property as the name, which the all user will contain, and the property we need to define inside an object. It will contain the type. So we need to define the type of the name. So we can have a type. So we can add type equals to the string. So we have the schema, we have the name, and then we need to define the name as the type, which will be equals to the string. And then it is a required field as well. So we can have a required. The required will be equals to the true. And if the required is equals to the true, then if we don't provide the property as the name, then the MongoDB will give us an error that the schema has the name property which is required. So now these things are there for the name, and then what we can do is we can just provide here the another property would be the email. So we can just copy and paste, and then now we have the property name as the email, and the email will also be type of the string, and the required equals to the true. And here we can write another property for the email which is unique. So we can have here the unique. So we have the unique property would be equals to the true. So what does that unique mean? So the email will be unique for all of the users. So email cannot be duplicated for any other user. And then we can have the password as well. So we can have the password, and the password will again the type will be equals to again the string. And then we need to add the required field again for the password. So the required will also be the true. And after that, what we need to do is again we need to add the min length. So we have the property of the min length inside that. So the min length property is just define the minimum length of the password. So we can have a minimum length as the 6. So if we provide the password as the length of the 5, or we can define the 4, so this will give an error that the password contains a minimum length, and the minimum length should be equals to the 6. So now these are just 3 fields that we want to just add inside the schema. We have the name, we have email, and then we have the password. And now we want to just export this schema as the module. So now the schema contains a module, so we want to just export the schema. So here we want to just export it as a default module. So for exporting it as a default module, we have a module dot exports. So we have a function of the exports, and the module dot export will be equals to, again we need to build the model of the user. So we can have a mongoose dot model. So we need to use the model function from the mongoose, and the model will contain the name of the model. Like here we can give the model name as the user. So now we have just defined the name of the model as a user, and then we need to just define the schema of the user again. So we can just define the schema as the user schema that we have defined. So we have defined the user schema. Now we have just created this as a module, and we have the module.exports. So we have a default export of the module as the mongoose.model equals to the user. And now inside the MongoDB database, there will be a new collection of the users. The name inside the MongoDB collection will be the users. because the MongoDB just changes the name from the singular to the plural form. So now we have built the schema of the user, and now the model has been created. And now the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a route path in which we will call a controller function, and then the controller function will access the user model from the database, and it will perform the operations with the user model. So how can we do that? So in the routes, we can move on to the routes folder, and we can just define a file as the user routes. So we have a user routes.js, and in this file we will just create the routes for this user. So we can have the routes for getting all of the users, for getting any specific user, then for updating a user, then for deleting a user. So the first thing that we want to do for creating these routes, we want to import the express. So we have a const express will be equals to, we have a require, then the require will be equals to the express. Now what we want to do is we want to just declare a variable as a router. So the router will be equals to, we have the router inside the express.js, inside the express, which will give its functionality to the router. So we can have a const router will be equals to the express dot router. So we have a router inside the express. So now this router variable has all of the functionalities of this router, and this contains all of the request methods as well. So we can have a router dot get, we can have a post HTTP request, we can have a put, we can have a delete as well. So now we have all of the requests of the database. So now we have all of the HTTP requests, and now what we can do is first route will be the get route. It will be the get, and the get will be a slash URL, which is an empty URL. So we have an empty URL after this get, and then what we want to do is we want to point to any functions. So we want to point to a controller function after that. So for pointing to a controller function, so we need to move on to the controller, and then we can just define the user controller.js. So now we have the user controller, and inside that now we can just create a function which will just access the database from the model, and then it will just get all of the users from the database. So how can we do that? So now we can just declare a function, can be the const, it can be the get all users, would be equals to a function, and it will be asynchronous function, so it will be async, and then it will contain the request, response, and the next parameter as we get inside the handler inside the routes. So now we have the request, so now we have the get all users function which has the asynchronous request, response, and the next. And now what we want to do after next, so then we can just find all of the users from the database. So first we need to just declare a variable as the users, and then we need to run the database code inside the try catch block, because it's a database request and it can fail as well. So we need to run inside the try catch, just return the next as the error. So we will just create next middleware as well for the error. So now what we want to do inside that, so now inside the try catch block, first thing that we want to do is we want to import the user model, and then we want to call the find function from the user. So in the Mongos we have the find function to find all of the records from the document on a given query. So if we provide any query to the find, then it will just give the records as per the query, but if we don't provide any query, it will just fetch all of the records. So with that, now what we can do, so we can have the users will be equals to, we can have the user model. So here we have the user, and now you can see the user is also imported. So we have the user.find. So we have a find function which runs on a query. So if we provide any query, so it will just give the results on that specific query. So now we are not providing any queries, so it will just give all of the results from the database, and it's a database operation. So again we need to use the await, and then only we need to move on to the next statement. After that we can just check some validation as well, like if the users is a falsy value, or we have some error fetching the users, so we can just return the response dot status would be equals to like 400 or like a 500. So now what we are doing here is now we are now just checking if we don't have the users, like if the users is a falsy value, or like there is some error fetching the users, we are now returning the response of that server as the 500. So we have the 500 response at the internal server error, and then we can also send here the JSON message as well, which will contain the message, and the message will be equals to like internal server error. So this is how we can just make a request. So now we are checking if we don't have the users, then we are now returning a response.status as the 500, which has an internal server error. If we pass this code, then we can just return the response.status. So then if everything is okay, then the response.status will be equals to the 200, which is okay. And then we can send here the JSON message, which will contain the message, like it will contain all of the users inside that. So we have all of the users with the JSON. So we can just add here the users, add the users as well, but with the ES6 we don't need to provide that users again. So now this is the function of the get all users. So as we are now defining let users, then we are just defining the users equals to the await user.find, So it will just find all of the records from the database, and then if we get an error, we will just move on to the next middleware with that error. Then you can see now if we don't have the users, or if the users have the empty value, so now returning the response.status at the 500, and we have the JSON of the internal server error. And then once everything is okay, then we need to just return the response.status as the 200, which is okay. And then we are sending a JSON as the users. So this users will contain an array. So this will get all of the users from the database. So now what we need to do is now we need to just export this function as well. So for that we can just say the exports dot, we need to add the function name like get all users will be equals to the get all users function. Now we have just exported this function, and now what we need to do is now again we need to move on to the user routes, and now we need to just point to this function as well. So we have the get all users from that. Now we have a get all users from the require users controller. So now we have just declared here the router dot get, and with the get request, with the get and slash empty request, we need to just add here the get all users. Now we need to export this router module as well. So the router will be only a single module, so we need to add here the module dot exports will be equals to the router. So we have the module dot exports will be equals to the router. And now what we need to do is now we want to move on to the main file, which is the app.js, and here once we are getting the const app equals to the express, and now what we need to do, and now inside the main app.js file we need to create a middleware for getting all of the routes and controllers. So for that we can just define here the middleware with the default URL. So we have the app.use as the middleware. So then we can just define this slash users, and then we need to just point here the router. So what I'm doing here is now we are now defining the middleware as the app.use, and then we have slash users. So it will work on the localhost 5000 slash users slash any route after that. So now we have just defined a middleware, and the middleware contains the slash users. So now this route will work on the localhost 5000 slash users, and then if there is any route after that, then this router will contain that route. Like here we have this slash this, so this will work like the slash users localhost 5000 slash users slash this route, because we don't have anything after that. So if we have anything like users again, so this will work slash users, because it will give the base URL structure to this router. So we can just remove this as of now, and then we can just remove the user as of now. So now this is the route that we want to create, and now what we need to do is now we need to just call this API from the front end. So we don't have a front end as of now, so what we need to do to call the API, so we can install the Postman to call these APIs. So for that we can just move on to the browser once again, and then we can just search for the Postman inside the applications. Postman. So the Postman is like an API platform which is used to test the API. So we can just download this Postman from there. So we have the option of the download the desktop app. So if you're on a Windows, you can select the Windows. If you're on the Mac, you can select the Mac. If you're on the Linux, you can select the Linux. So I'm on the Windows, so I will now just download it from the Windows. So now I've already installed the Postman, so I don't need to reinstall the Postman again and again. And the steps are very simple for the Postman as well. So you can just click on the download, and then you can just install the Postman, and then you can just open the Postman as well. So now I've already installed the Postman, so I will now just open the Postman from there, my system. This is the screen of the Postman that we want to use. So then we can just create a new request from there. So we can have a plus icon, create a new tab, and then we can just write the URL of this route. So we have the URL of the localhost 5000 slash users and slash empty after that. So we can have http localhost, the port of the 5000 slash users would be the local host, and we have the port of the 5000 slash users slash empty after that. If you want to just click on the send, if we just send a new request, then you can see now we have the status equals to the 200, which is okay. So the MongoDB has responded with the status of the 200, which is okay. And then you can see we got the empty array inside the users, because we don't have any users as of now inside the database. And now you can see now we have just successfully created a request inside our application with the get request. So we have just made use of the middlewares, and then we have the connections. So now everything is working perfectly fine, and now you can see we have the status of the 200, which is okay as well. And now we have successfully created a route in which we are getting all of the users from the database with a get request. And now the users list is empty because we don't have any record inside the collection of the users. And now what we want to do is now we want to create another route which will be a post request. So with that request we can store the data of the user inside the database. How can we do that? So we can just move on to the routes inside the user routes.js, and then we can just define another route, and it can be a post HTTP request. So it would be the router.post. So it would be the router.post. So we can just add here the post, and after that the URL will be the same. So we don't need to change the URL as well. So we just need to change the request like the get to the post. So then we can just create a function for the post request as well. So for that, what we can do is we can just move on to the users controller, and then we can just define another function for the post HTTP request. So again, what we want to do is we can define a function. It can be a add user. So it will be equals to a async function. It will contain the request, response, and the next as the parameters as well. So now we have just created the add user function, and so now we have just defined the add user. So now for storing the user in the database, we will send some data from the front end. So we will send the data inside the body and with the JSON format data. So what we want to do, so as we send the data inside the body, so we need to extract the data inside this function as well. So how can we extract that data? So we can extract the data inside the request.body fields. So we will send the data inside the JSON, and it will contain inside the request.body. So what we can do, so we can just extract all of the things from there, from the request.body. So from the request.body, we will send the name of the user, we will send the email of the user, and then we will send the password of the user as well. So now these are the things, the password. So these are the things that we will send from the request.body from that Postman. And now what we want to do is, now we want to process the data as well. So then we can just check some validations as well with that. So if we don't have the name, or else the name dot trim, so we can just trim that name, and then if it is equals to the empty string, then we don't need to perform that, and then we can just provide some more validation checks inside the same if condition, and then we can just check for the email. So if we don't have the email, or if the email is a falsy value, or the email dot trim, so if we trim the email, if we remove the white spaces, then if it's an empty string, then we don't need to perform any step. Or we don't have the password, so we can just check for the password, and if the password dot length, so if the password dot length is less than 6, then we don't need to perform that. And then after that, we can just return the response, like we can just return here the response, because if we get the invalid data, then we don't need to perform a database operation, then we don't need to add something to a database. So with that, we can just return the response dot status would be equals to the 422, and the 422 status of the response means that the unprocessable entity, it means like the data cannot be processed inside the database. So with that, we can just send a JSON as well, and the JSON will contain a message again. Message will contain like the invalid data. So now we are just checking some validation here. If we don't have the name, or if the name is empty string, and same for the email and the password. And now what we want to do, so after we pass this validation check, now we want to create a user. So we can have a let user, and then we will create the user inside the try catch again for the database. So we can have a try catch. Inside the try catch, in the catch we will just return the next. So we will move on to the next middleware with the error inside that. And now what we want to do inside the try catch, so inside the try, we want to create a user, and then we need to create a new instance of the user from the user model. So we can have a new user. So now the new user will contain an object as well, so it will contain the name as the property. So now you can see we have the property as the name, and then we can just provide the same name with the property. So we can provide the name colon name as well, but as per the ES6 is defined, so we just need to add the name, and same for the email, and same for the password as well. So we have the email and the password. Now what we want to do, so now we have just defined a new user with that, and now what we want to do is we want to save this user as well to the database. So how can we do that? So again, we have a function inside the mongoose to save a record. So we have the user. So as we have the user here, so we can call here the user.save. So it will just save a record inside the database as well. So now it will just save a record inside the users collection, and now we can just check some validations again, like if the user is a false value again, like if the user didn't save, or if it's a false value, then we can just return the response dot status would be equals to, like we can have a status of the 500 as the internal server error, and then we can add a JSON like message. We can have the enable to save user, and after that, so if we passed this validation check, then we can just return the response dot status would be equals to the 201. So now the status of the 201 means the created. Something is created inside the database or inside the backend. So we send the status as the 201. And then what we want to do is, again, we want to send here the JSON message. It will contain the message, or we can just directly send here the user to the record, to the response. So we have the response.status as the 201, and we have the JSON/user. And now this is the code for it. So we just have here the name, email, and the password, which will extract from the request.body. And then we will check some validation, and if the validation didn't succeed, then we will just return the response.status as the 422, and we send a JSON message as the invalid data. And then we will send here the user, and the user is equals to a new user. We are creating a new instance, a new document of the user, and then we are just saving the user inside the database. And then if we don't have the user, or if it's a falsy value, or if it didn't save, so if this is a falsy value, then we will just send here the response.status as the 500, which is the internal server error. And then we will send here the JSON as the unable to save the user. And if everything works fine, then we will just return the response.status as the 201, and we will send here the message as the user. And now we need to just export this function module as well. So export dot add user equals to the add user. So we can have a add user. So now we can just move on to the user routes, and for the post request, what we want to do is we want to add the add user, and have the add user from that file. So now we have exported get all users and the add user as well. So now what we want to do is we want to get another request inside this database. So we can just have another request, and then we can just copy that URL here. So the URL is same, so we can just paste same URL here. After that, the request dot method is now the post. So we have the post method now inside the HTTP request. Now we need to send here the body. So we will send the body as the raw JSON file inside that. So we can send here the JSON. And now we need to provide the fields, like we need to provide the name. So we have the name. So name, I will provide my name as the Nikhil. And then what we want to do is we want to provide the email. The email will be like, we can provide the email as the nikhil@test.com. And then we can provide the password. So we can provide the password as 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So if we now just send a new request to the backend, so if we just click on the send, I think we have an error. So we can just check that error inside the console window as well, that what is the error. So the error is saying like the unhandled promise rejection warning. I cannot destructure property name of the request.body as it is undefined. So we get this message as we cannot destructure the property name of the request.body and it is undefined. So the error is shown like cannot destructure the property of the name, and the name is undefined inside that. But why? As we have defined here the name. So now this error is coming because the application doesn't know that which type of data we will send from the front end. So we need to tell the application like that type of data will be then given to the backend, and then you need to perform the data. So how can we tell that to the backend application? So here we are working with the JSON data. So we need to tell that application that we are working with the JSON. And for that, how can we do? So the first middleware of our application should be the app.use, and then it will be equals to the app, or like it will be the express.json. So we have a function inside the express, which is the express.json. So as we are working with the JSON inside this application, so we need to tell that application that the application would accept the data which is converted into the JSON format. So if we send the data as the JSON, so the application should accept that data. So now the request.body will contain the JSON as well. So if we now just save, if we now just click on the send request again, so now everything should work fine. So now the request is successful, but we got the empty object inside that. So I think there is some error. So if we just check with the get request, if we just click on the send, so now we got the user as well. So now everything is working perfectly fine, but inside the post request we got this empty object. But why? If we just move on to the user's controller, we can just check if everything works fine or not. So now here we are declaring the new user instance. So we need to use the await as well, because it's a database operation, and we need to just wait for this task to complete as well. So for that, we can just use here the await. So if we just move on to the application again, if we just create a different user, like it can be a James, and then it will be the james@test.com, and the password should be the same. You now just click on the send, and now you can see now we got the data as well here inside the Postman. We got the user as the James and the james@test.com. So we have the password as well, and then we got the ID as well. So now you can see we got two new fields as the ID and _v. The ID is the ID which the MongoDB has created. So it creates the ID for every document. So for this document, it has created the ID like this. So now you can see, if we just click on the get again, if we just click on the send request, so now you can see there are two users inside the database. So now both of the requests are now working perfectly fine. So as we have defined the request on the get for the get all users and the post for the add user, so both of the requests are working perfectly fine. And now the next request is for the update request. So we need to update a user from its ID. So for that, what we can do is we can just define another request here with the router. So we can have the router dot put. So with the update, we use a put type of request in the HTTP. So with the put, what we can do, we can just provide here this slash, and then we can just add here the ID. So for adding the parameter inside the route params, so inside the params object, if we want to add any parameter inside that, so we need to add the parameter with the colon. So we can have a colon and then the name of the parameter, like we can just define the ID, or we can just define UID as well. So but I will now go with the ID. So now we need to define a parameter ID. So we need to define a variable inside the parameter. So that would be the ID now. And now what we want to do is, first we want to get the ID, then we want to update that user from that ID. So how can we do that? So first we will get the ID, and then we will just call a controller function after that. So we can just move on to the users controller again, and then we can just create a request for the update user as well. So first it will be a const, the update user would be equals to again an async function, and in the request response and next as the parameters. And what after that is, first we need to grab the ID. So how can we grab the ID? For grabbing the ID, first we can just declare here the ID, and the ID is available from the request.params. So these are the parameters of the request. So these are the request URL parameters. So we need to get the ID from the URL parameters. So how can we do that? So we have the request.params object inside this request. So we have the request.params, and the request.params contains all of the things which are available inside the URL parameters. If we define as the colon ID, so we can just define any ID after that, and even any ID after that as well. So we can just define anything, and then we can just extract their values with the request.params object. So we have the request.params, and then if we want to get the ID, then we can just grab this ID from that ID. So now we got the ID inside this. So now after we are getting the ID, then we want to destructure the properties again. So we want to destructure the name, email, and the password properties again. So what we can do is we can just copy this code. So we can just grab all of this code from there. So here we are destructuring name, email, and the password from the request.body, and then we are just checking some validation. Need to get same code from here. So I will now paste this code here. So now what after that, now we can just define the let user. So we can have a let user, and again we can use the try catch block. The try catch, we again can have a try catch, contain the error, then return. In next it will contain the error. So now what after that, in the try, so it would be the user would be equals to, so now we have a function inside the Mongoose again with the find by ID and update. So that function will get the ID first, and then we need to just provide the data which we need to update from that ID. So it runs on the query basis. So the find by ID will just loop through the document, and it will find that object with the same ID, and then it will update that object with the data that we give to it. So we can have here the await. So it will be the user. So we have the user model dot find by ID and update. So we have this function, and then what we need to do, so we need to pass here the ID as the first argument. So the first argument will contain the ID, and the second argument will contain the object that we want to send. So here in the object we want to send the name, email, and the password. So we want to just send these three things here, as we are destructuring this thing here as well. So here the find by ID and update will automatically call this save function as well. So we don't need to call here the save as well. So now the user is equals to the await and the user dot find by ID and update. So now everything should work perfectly fine. And then after that we can just check some validation again, like if we don't have the user, if the user is a falsy value, then we can just return response dot status would be equals to, we can have a status of the 500, and then we can have the JSON as well. So we have the JSON, and then we have a JSON as the message. It will contain like unable to save user again. So we have the unable to save user, and after that if everything works fine, then we can just return the response dot status would be equals to the 200, which is success, and then we can just send here the JSON message. It will contain the updated data, or we can just send here the message only, the message the updated successfully. we have this message as the updated successfully if everything works fine. So now we can just save, and now what we are doing inside the function, we are just declaring the id. So we are getting the request.params.id with params object. It should be the params, not the param, so it should be the request.params.id, and then we can destructure all of the things from the request.body, and then we have defined the user. And then what we are doing is we are now just finding the user by its id, and then we are updating that user, and then we are sending the response.status as the 200 if everything works fine. Now we need to export this function as well. So we have the exports dot, it will be the update user will be equals to the update user again. We can have the update user, then we can just move on to the user routes again, and then we have the controller of the update user. So now we need to just save. So now if we just move on to the application, so now we can just create another request here. The request will contain, I think, the same URL. So it will contain this URL, and after that we need to pass here the id as well. So if we get all of the users again, so now we have two users. So if we just click this id with the James, so if we just copy the id of the James, then we need to just paste this id of the James here after the users, as we have defined here the id. So we need to just define the id after the URL. URL will contain the id after the blank URL, and then the method of the request will be the put. So we have defined the method as the put, so it will be put method, and then we need to just define here the body JSON. So we can just copy that body again from there. So we can just copy that, then we can just paste this body here. So now we have the names, so we can just have here the James as the Johnson. So now we have updated the name, and then we have updated the password as well with the 8. So we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 as the password. So if we just click on the send, so now everything should work fine. We now click on the send, and now you can see now we got the message as the updated successfully as well. Now the user is updated successfully. If we just get this user again, if we just click on the send, and now you can see now we got the updated user as well. So we have the James and Johnson, and then you can see we have the password as the updated as well. So now everything in our application is working perfectly fine, and now you can see now we have just successfully created these 3 routes. We are now getting all of the users, we are now getting the post request, and then we have also declared the put request, which is also working perfectly fine. So now I hope you are learning a lot from this video. And now what we want to do next, so we want to create a delete request as well. So now with the CRUD operation, what we have done, so we have just getting all of the users, we are now adding the user to the database, and then we are updating the user, and the final thing that is remaining inside the CRUD application would be deleting the user. So how can we delete the user? So again we need to create a delete request for the router. So we need to create the delete request route. For the delete, again it will be the same URL slash id again. It will be same URL slash id, and then there will be a function of the delete user. So we can just move on to the controller functions, and then we can just define a function. So it can be const delete user would be equals to an async function again. It will contain the request, response, and the next as the parameters. And now the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the id again. So for the id, we can just get this id from the request.params.id again. So just get this id. So now we have the id. So now what we want to do is we want to just declare here the user. So now we don't need the request.body data here, because we just need the id of the user. So we don't need that destructuring of the name, email, and the password. So we only need the id, and we just need to delete the user from the database from that given id. So how can we do that? So we can again define let user, and then we can again use a try catch block again after that. So with the try catch, and then we will just return next, it would be the error. So now in the try catch block, what we can do is we can just define the user. Again we have a function inside the mongoose as the find by id and remove. So it will just remove the document from that collection. So we can just have here the await, it will be the user dot find by id and remove. So we can just call this function, and then we need to pass here the id as well. So now we are just passing here the id as the find by id and remove, and it will just automatically remove that document from that collection, and it will just save the record as well. After that, again we can just pass the validation check. If we don't have the user, then we need to just return the response.status would be equals to again the 500, and the message of the JSON will contain like unable to delete. After that, if everything works fine, then we can just return the response.status would be equals to, we can send our status as the 200, which is okay. Then we can just send the JSON message again. It will contain the message that is successfully deleted. So we have a successfully. So we have the message as they successfully deleted. So now we have just defined the delete user, and the delete user just contains the ID. So we get the ID from the request.params.id. Then we are just defining the try catch block. So if the user, so then we have just awaited for the users like find by ID and remove. So we are awaiting for this task. So it will just find by ID from that query. So it will run a query with that ID, and then it will remove that document if it finds a document with that ID. And then if we get an error, then we are moving to the next middleware. And if we don't have the user, then we are just returning the status of the 500, or else if everything works fine, we are returning the status of the 200 and the message as is successfully deleted. And then we need to export this function as well. So we can have the exports dot, we can have a delete user, it will be equals to the delete user. Again we have the delete user. If we now just save, and now we need to move on to the user routes, and here we can have the delete user, we have the delete user inside that. So now we have imported all of those functions, and now we have the delete request as well. So if we now just save, if we now just create another request here, so the URL should be the same again. If we want to just delete this record as well from the James, if we want to do that, we can just provide this URL and then ID, and the request will be the delete. So now we have just given the URL as the user slash this ID. So we want to just delete this user from that. So we want to delete the James user from the database. So we can run a delete operation with that. If we now just click on the send, now just click on the send, and now you can say now we got the message as is successfully deleted. So now the user is also successfully deleted. If we now just get all of the users from the database, so now you can see now we have only one object inside the array of the collections. So everything is working perfectly fine again. And now we have completed the CRUD operation with the MongoDB, Node.js and the Express.js. So this is how we can create some projects inside the Node.js. And now we have an assignment for you. And the assignment is, now the CRUD operation is almost complete, but we want to create another route with that. And the another route will be, we want to get the user from their ID. So now it's your task, so you need to perform that task as well. So this is an assignment for you, but if you are facing any issue in the assignment, then you can just watch my approach as well. So how can I do that? So now that's an assignment for you, so you can pause the video and then you can just start your assignment. So were you successful? So let's try out with me. So now we can just create another router. So we have the router.get, so it will be a get request again. So we can just pass here the ID. So we can just get a request, then we have to pass here the ID. Then we can just move on again to the user's controller, and inside that controller what we can do is we can define another function. It can be const get user by ID, and it will be equals to the async. And then what we want to do is we want to just get the user from this ID. How can we do that? So first we need to get the ID. So we can get the ID from the request.params.id. And now what we want to do is we want to define the user. So we have the let user, and now again we want to do it inside the try catch block. So we have the try catch. So the try catch, if we get an error, then we will just return the next middleware with the error. And now inside the try, what we want to do, the user will be equals to, we have the function, we have the method inside the mongoose again. So we have the await with the user dot find by ID. So we have the function inside the mongoose with the find by ID, which runs on a query, and then we find the document by its ID. So we just send here the document ID. So it will just filter over all of the documents which matches this ID. It will just give you that document. So now we have this user equals to the await user dot find by ID. After that, if we just check some validation again, like if we don't have the user, then what we want to do is we want to return response dot status would be equals to the 404, that unable to find the user from this ID. And then we can send the JSON as well with the message equals to the enable find user with this ID. Now if everything is successful, then what we need to do is we want to just return the response dot status would be equals to the 200, which is successful. Then we can send here the JSON as well, which will contain the message, or it will just directly contain the user. It will just contain here the user. So now this is the function for the get by ID. So now we just got the ID from the request.params.id, and then we have just defined here the user, and then we have a function inside the mongoose as the find by ID. It runs on a query and it will find the document with the given ID. And then if we don't have any document, then we are just returning the message as the unable to find the user with this ID. And then if everything works fine, then we are sending a response.status as the 200 and the JSON as the user. And again we can just have here the exports dot get user by id would be equals to the get user by id. So now what we want to do, we want to move on to the user routes, and then we want to just define the route as a get user by id. So now we have this controller function for this get request. Now what we want to do, first I will now just add a record inside the database. So we have this James, so we can just click on the send. Now you can see if we just click on the get, so now you will see there will be 2 documents inside that. So now if you want to get the first document from its id, so we can just copy that id, and then what we can do is we can just provide the id inside the same request. We can have this id, we have the users slash id. If we just click on the send, so now only this document should appear. If we just click on the send, I think we got an error. The error is that request is not defined, so I think so we have missed that request. So it should be the request, response, and the next as well. It will be the request, response, and the next. So if we now just save, if we now just click on the send again, we now just click on the send, and now you can see now we got the same user with that. So now we got the user with the id of that same id that we have defined the id here, and then we have the name as the Nikhil, we have the email as the nikhil@test.com, and then we have the password as well. Everything is working perfectly fine. And if you want to check the validation, if you want to just change the last character, like here we have the e, if you want to create with the a, if you will just click on the send again, and now you can see now you got the message as the unable to find the user with this id. So now you can see the validations are also working perfectly fine, and if you write the correct id, you will get the document as well. So everything in our application is working perfectly fine, and now we have successfully created our full project with this application. So now we have completed the user management project, in which we have created the CRUD operation with the MongoDB, Node.js, and the Express.js. So we have created that API, and then we have created the routes, and then we have just followed the model view controller approach, in which the model we have defined the user model, and then we have defined the controller functions, and then the approach for the view is like a Postman. So we have tested all of the API with the Postman. So this is the final project for our application. So that's all for this project. So now we will see the summary of the application, that what we have done. So we have just completed the tutorial of the Node.js. So we have just created the Node.js applications directly from the scratch, and then we were working with the file systems as well with the Node.js, and then we were working with the modules as well, and we were creating our own modules as well, and then we were getting the simple APIs with the Node.js and the Express.js as well. And after that we created a major project with the user management tool, in which we can just create the users, we can just delete the users, we can update the users, and we can just get the users by the specific id. So this is all about this application. So that's all for this tutorial. So thanks for watching the tutorial, and I hope you will like the video as well. So please subscribe to the channel as well, so I should be motivated to post the videos like this. So that's all for this video.